Thank you very much for your kind invitation here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank Confrontation Europe for organizing this conference on such a critical and timely issue, and to give Alain Lamassoure and myself the occasion to express ourselves in a language which is not ours in a country where everybody speaks French. So today's roundtables have addressed very relevant topics. I'm sure you've had a passionate and exciting debate throughout, and I'd also like to thank the Friedland Institute for its involvement today. I strongly believe in the exchange of ideas that can result from gatherings such as today's, by bringing together personalities from both the policymaking and the business world. We can be sure that all the lines of communication are open, and we need the support of the business to make progress in that field. This is exactly the approach that is needed if we are to have a constructive and thoughtful exchanges of view that will help us to deliver on one of the greatest challenges affecting our economies and our citizens today. We are debating important initiatives which can drive forward our remodeling of the foundations of the corporate tax systems in Europe. That is no less than that we are trying to do for the time being. There should be no surprise if I say that we need urgently to address the functioning of our tax rules in Europe. The many tax scandals that have been revealed by the media, and in particular by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which has played a very useful role in the recent years, are concrete proof of the weaknesses of our current rules, and these revelations have had a great impact on hearts and minds, and they have galvanized EU countries into action, and also the European Parliament. And I remember our cooperation, dear Alain, in the tax committees that you have got the occasion to chair brilliantly. We cannot continue to tolerate practices of tax optimization and fraud as it was the case in the past. They deeply damage the single market and the very foundations of our democratic societies. Our citizens cannot stand that they pay their fair share of tax, that they contribute to reduce deficits, while some, because they've got armies of lawyers and they exploit the loopholes between our tax legal framework, can avoid that. This is not possible anymore. Ultimately, it is European citizens who are penalized by outdated tax rules. How can we, as policymakers, I'm one of them, ask them to contribute heavily to the public good only for companies or well-off individuals to avoid this fair share of tax? This is not possible. And our citizens deserve better. In 2016, a Eurostat survey found that 75% of Europeans expect the EU to take action against tax avoidance and tax fraud. Tax fraud even ranked third in top priorities for the EU after the fight against terrorism and unemployment. This gives you the feeling of how high it is. This situation undermines the basis of our democratic societies by weakening the very principle of consent to taxation. And this resentment is dangerous as it is the roots of a populist discourse that they are all rotten to the core, and it reinforces the deadly opposition between the people and the elites, which is one of the main challenges of our societies today. This calls for an overhaul of the European framework to bring the corporate taxation system into the 21st century. That's why we've proposed the harmonization and consolidation of the corporate tax base and the adaptation of tax rules to address challenges posed by the digitalization of our economies. Let me start with the first point, harmonization of the corporate tax rules in the EU. Of course, I will address the other one. Europe doesn't have a choice when it comes to tax matters. We can only progress if we have a collective strategy. Member states have a lot to lose if we do not. including a considerable amount of tax revenues. Our reaction is crucial at a time when Europe needs to respond effectively and collectively to the major challenges of the 21st century, which are digital, climate, migration, security challenges. Of course, the debate on the principle of sovereignty should not be undermined or overshadowed. I often hear arguments that member states cannot and should not give up their national sovereignty, and maybe some here in this very room have expressed those arguments. I agree. Sovereignty should not be abandoned to anyone, but we need to share that. Sovereignty now needs to be exerted collectively so that it gets a chance to succeed. Individual approaches will only lead us to a race to the bottom from which everyone, and I mean citizens, SMEs, national budgets, will lose out. We should avoid a situation where member states get locked into a contest where they try to outbid each other to attract companies with the best possible tax offers. This is a vicious circle which leads nowhere, and we've experienced that a lot in the past years. It is with conviction that I say that fiscal dumping should not any longer be used as a weapon between countries that share the same economic goals. In that context, the Common Consolidated Corporate Tax Base, CCTB, and I insist on the 3 Cs, dear Alain, has a central role to play as an essential tool for European tax harmonization or tax convergence, depends on the way we want to address it. The CCCTB's objective is to define a completely new framework of taxation for the years ahead with a view to building a fairer, more efficient, more attractive and sustainable tax system, and to limit national divisions and administrative burdens. The CCTB is our response to all different economic actors. Firstly, the CCCTB offers a genuine single market for business with simplified, stable, uniform rules, and it sets the conditions for a fair and equal competition. It will allow businesses to anticipate their tax bill in advance, and it will also strengthen the European market considerably. Tax stability and fiscal justice as a major asset for the development of our economy. This is what we plan to do. The positive impact on our SMEs cannot be underestimated, nor for our more important business. Secondly, the CCCTB contributes to the fight against tax evasion being called for by citizens, and which stems from asymmetries between national tax systems. By eliminating transfer pricing, which is one of the main causes of optimization, and preferential regimes, which are the primary vectors of tax evasion, it offers fairer taxation as taxes are paid where the profit is generated, which is also a major call from our citizens. Lastly, the CCCTB provides the necessary sustainability and income stability to member states when it comes to their tax revenues. Where do we stand in the CCCTB discussions? Discussions on the technical aspects of the proposals have progressed well in the Council. Member states have been able to agree on the first document on the key elements of the common base. Each of them will now evaluate the technical implications of these proposals for their respective budget and present their conclusions so that an agreement can be reached at European level. In an impact assessment, the Commission estimated the CCCTB to bring an overall increase in growth of up to 1.2% and additional investment of 89 billion euros. The European Parliament adopted the 2 CCCTB reports on the 15th of March 2018, and I would like again to thank the rapporteurs, which have, I think, intervened here. One is sure, Alain Lamassoure, and Paul Tang also was here, I imagine, today. And they have had an invaluable contribution to this debate. The amendments that they have proposed should be carefully looked at. But one thing I want to add, I said that there is a start of an agreement on a common base, but to me, we must not stick to that. The three C's must be linked together, and it must be a common and consolidated tax base. Even if it is a two-steps approach, it must be seen as a global approach. The CCCTB is now well on track, but the crucial additional dimension has now been added to get the full picture of where taxation should be headed in the future, and it's linked to CCCTB. It is the digital economy. This, I understand, was also a theme of one of your roundtables. What's the issue there? It is undeniable that the accelerated digitalization of our economies has profoundly transformed how we work, how we travel, how we interact with each other. The recent boom in digital businesses has also shaken member states in their capacity to regulate emerging business models, including in tax matters. New players and innovative services have emerged in the past 20 years, and the digital economy today is absolutely flourishing. Digital businesses are growing by 14% on average each year, and the digital economy sector is expected to represent 4% of European GDP in 2020. Of course, it's not the case for all sectors of the economy. I am deeply convinced that the globalization and the increasing digitalization of our economies are an opportunity for Europe's competitiveness, growth, and employment. This Commission is pro-digital and pro-business. We certainly don't want to damage this by any action. However, we are faced with unprecedented developments, and our tax rules have not changed since the creation of the Internet. To tell the truth, they have been built almost a century ago on the concept of digital presence. I will come back on that. We are now in an untenable situation. Companies in the traditional economy are currently taxed at 23% on average in Europe, compared to only 9% for digital companies. This is mainly due to the fact that a country can only tax a company if it has registered offices, shops, factories. This is located in its territory. However, current tax rules were not designed to cater for those companies that are global, virtual, or have little or no physical presence. Physical presence is the real key to define the taxation basis. Some of these companies can therefore avoid taxation, and as you know, there have been cases which have been pinpointed by the European Commission. One of them is the Apple case in Ireland, which I mentioned because it represents something like 13 billion euros, which have not been involved in the Irish treasury. I mean Ireland for the rest of Europe, because of course the revenues will have to be shared. The future of our economies will be globalized and it will be digital. The question is, how can we make sure that our tax system embrace this change and deliver sustainable revenues for the future? So the absence of physical presence calls for new solutions. What are they? We could, of course, wait for member states to come up with their own national sticking plasters to solve the problem in the short term. But this, in turn, risks even more tax obstacles, asymmetries, and uncertainty. The resulting patchwork of national tax rules would certainly make it extremely difficult for companies to operate in the internal market. I was last week in Washington, was invited by a quite conservative think tank, American Institute for Enterprise, and even them could understand that this is not good for business and that it is the worst case scenario. I think that our companies have more to gain from a common European framework than from a piecemeal approach with 27 or 18 or 16 or 10 national taxes. I've personally spoken to some companies, just as Alain did, that already acknowledge this fact and have a strong opinion about such unilateral action. When I mean about, I mean also against. Or, second solution, you wait for an international agreement. Indeed, we all prefer a global solution. Again, in Washington, I had meetings with, for example, Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin, and we agreed on the fact that it is an international and global challenge and that it should be addressed internationally or globally. It is the best. But as we all know, competing interests lead to very long negotiations in the framework of OECD and G20. We are involved in those negotiations, but we cannot wait because we are a single market. And because if we don't act together, then we know that national decisions will be taken and that our member states will decide for their own. Meanwhile, member states' budgets are constrained by the fact that they cannot tax the very substantial economic activity that is taking place in the digital economy sector. So neither of those two scenarios are viable for the moment. This is why the Commission, as you know, adopted two complementary legislative proposals on March the 21st. The first initiative aims to reform corporate taxation rules to enable member states to tax profits generated in their territory, even if a company does not have a physical presence there. As you know, this proposal introduces the concept of digital presence into European law and a revision of the rules for allocating profits. Our objective there is to integrate the structural solution into the CCTB proposal I described earlier. The modalities for this are still to be defined, but this is the Commission's preferred long-term solution, and I insist on that. Well, of course, media insist a lot on short-term solutions. I will come on this, call it a GAFA tax, which is not the case, etc., etc. But what interests me first and foremost is the long-term solution. It is the definition of digital presence and the incorporation of that inside CCCTB. This is the structural reform that we need for a corporate taxation of the 21st century. But there is a second proposal that you all know, which responds to the call of a number of member states for an interim tax. This tax will apply to revenues created from certain digital activities which currently escape the current tax framework, such as social networks, research engines, or platforms. This is, or would be, because we need to have the agreement of the 28 member states, I say 28 for the time being. This is a temporary solution pending the introduction of the structural solution at a rate of 3%, an estimated over 5 billion euros in revenues per year could be generated to start with, probably in the future something like 8 million in average. These proposals are a matter of tax justice. If we don't act now, we run the risk of a race to the bottom, I repeat that, with serious distortions, which will hinder the functioning of the internal market. On the other hand, the share of the digital economy compared to the traditional economy will continue to increase. It is thus absolutely essential that member states get on board with these changes if they want to ensure budgetary stability and sustainable tax revenues for the future. Let me conclude before answering some questions by saying that I'm very interested to read the opinions expressed during the debates when they become available. I'd also like to express a personal conviction on the political dynamics around this very sensitive subject, which I hope can feed into the themes of your last roundtable. I'm conscious that progress will take time and that there will be difficult and cautious discussions on these topics. But the goal has never been to pit countries, companies, or economic models against each other, but rather to find a fair and balanced consensus. It is time for Europe to be ambitious in this tax reform so that business can develop in a stable tax environment without fearing unnecessary red tape and barriers. It is time for member states to work together collectively to restore tax justice and tax fairness by establishing common fiscal rules. These principles are, in my view, essential if we want to preserve EU's citizens' trust in public life, no less than that. It will ultimately guarantee the long-term functioning of our democracies. We are in a period where people doubt about Europe. What better proof can we give them than to demonstrate that we can really make progress in that field? I believe that there is a window of opportunity to progress on this topic. It is open. The pressure on digital companies is certainly growing, and recent scandals related to personal data have reminded us of the importance of building a fairer and more equal society. We also know that this window of opportunity is quite short. 1 year from now, there will be elections in the European Parliament in May 19. Then in November, there will be a new commission. We know what is a pre-electoral year. And this is why I urge member states to conclude on both files, even if they have to progress in parallel, before the end of the year 2018. That means under the Bulgarian presidency, and we will have an informal Eurogroup and an ECOFIN meeting this weekend in Sofia, and then the Austrian presidency. Europe is offering solutions for a better regulation of digital activities. I heard Alain showing that we've made a lot of progress together in the recent years, but this is now the decisive part of the play. Structural reforms. Let's move ahead at full speed. You may be assured that I will dedicate all my energy and spend the rest of the political capital this Commission have under this mandate and until the last day of the mandate. Thank you.
Danny from Institut Friedland. About the interim tax on certain revenue from digital activities, is it compatible with the proposal for reforming European Union's corporate tax rules on the basis of digital presence and with CCCTB?
As I said, we need to have a two-pronged approach. The first and most important approach is structural reform, and we must absolutely work in order to define precisely what digital presence is, and then this digital presence can authorize national member states to legislate, and it can also be incorporated into the CCCTB project. This would be, I think, the architecture of the future corporate tax that we want for Europe. But in the meantime, we know that it will take time because the parameters are quite complex, because the international discussions are quite slow and complex, because member states might not be ready to act immediately. In the meantime, we propose that there is an intermediary solution, but it has to be intermediary. That means that after the definition of the global and long-term solution, which includes as well digital presence and CCCTB, then the temporary tax should be withdrawn and replaced by the new approach. So the question is not that they are compatible, they are successive in my mind. And this must be clearly said, and this is clearly the way I see it and the Commission sees it. I'm very cautious about temporary measures that become definite. If I compare with another field of taxation, which is VAT, we are working with a temporary regime which is now 25 years old. And so, it's just like in the movie Alien. At the beginning, you have a very tiny, nice little beast, and in the end, the whole cabin explodes. And so let's not have a temporary measure which lasts forever, or else the cabin will explode.
Thank you. Marine Pouzoulé from Confrontation Europe. I would like to know, do you think that the CCCTB project is adapted to the new context created by the US tax reform, or shouldn't be adapted or adjusted?
Maybe one first reflection is that our very good and kind friends from over the Atlantic didn't wait for us to decide on their own how they have to reform their tax system. Well, I talked about sovereignty. They are fully sovereign, and they are free, for example, to reduce their tax rates, as any country inside the EU is free to do so, or as any country which would be outside the EU in the future could also do, even if I think that tax dumping should be avoided because it's in nobody's interest. And so I have no comment to make on that. Of course, we are watching the macroeconomic effects of that tax reform. On the short term, obviously they are positive because it stimulates US growth. On the medium term, we'll have to see whether it gives a strong, long-lasting impetus on this growth, but it will also create imbalances through more deficits and more debt in the US, so we need to watch that macroeconomically. That is one point that will be debated in the years to come in the framework of international institutions or forums such as G7 or G20. We have also other points of concern, and I would mention two. The first one is that we wonder whether some of these measures, especially the so-called BEAT, they call it that way. I don't know who is beaten, but BET or international intellectual property rules are compatible with the BEPS initiative that we follow together. And the other point is about compatibility of these same rules with WTO rules. We are engaged in discussing that with the business, and well, when we have a bit of certainty on that, we will act decisively, taking into account the result of those consultations. So CCCTB is not contradictory with that. We do not need to adapt that. It's not the same kind of reform. I think that, on the contrary, CCCTB is the best reply we can have because it gives us the structural reform of the 21st century that we obviously need.
Yes, you said that you intend to put all your political capacity to find consensus to move forward in the next weeks and months, actually. So I was wondering, what is your assessment of how this can be attained? We know that France and Germany are very constructive on this. But what vision can you give us about how this political consensus can be reached, and what kind of arguments can be used towards the countries that are less enthusiastic?
I spoke about the progress on the CCCTB debate. The other one is the digital taxation discussion, which is just starting now. Our proposal is very fresh. It's 1 month old, 21st of March. We will have our first discussion inside the Eurogroup and ECOFIN now, this weekend in Sofia. I've had already meetings with the COREPER here in Brussels, and I, of course, follow the debate in the media and sometimes discuss with my counterparts, ministers of finance. It's always the half-full, half-empty glass story. Some see the half-empty glass and saying this or that country, usually the same suspects, are reluctant, wandering, resisting, or blocking. It's too early to say. What I know is that I would say there is a quite strong basis of support for the proposal. If I count the 5 member states which have already expressed their support, and these are the 5 more important economies of Europe, naming Germany, France, UK, Spain, and Italy. If I look at those who are either supportive or more than interested, I see that there is a possibility to reach an agreement with 20 member states. But I'm conscious that we need to have unanimity on that, theoretically. And well, I'm not going to say what arguments we are going to use, but you may be sure that we will use all of them. Some will be rational, some will be less irrational, some might be political, all of them will be gentle, some might be less gentle. But we'll see how the debate develops in the weeks to come. I would say that, well, I know this is difficult. I'm conscious of that. But it happens as a tax commissioner. I know sometimes that some of the projects I put on the table, well, are unlikely to happen. I'm sorry to say, for example, I heard Alain speaking about that public CBCR, I'm dedicated to that. I see that there is quite a strong opposition, and I'm afraid that we won't solve that until the end of the mandate, even if the Commission continues to ask for it. But this is doable, digital taxation, really doable. And this is why, as I said, we must spend some political capital. I imagine that the exchange of views that we will have in Sofia will give us precious indications of where are the real concerns. There is one I want to address here. Some fear that this digital taxation could create a movement of delocalization or, exit from the EU. It makes no sense. First, because the rate is quite modest, 3%. The revenue is substantial but not enormous, 5 billion euros. These companies can live with that, obviously, because it's, for the time being, it's a consolidated revenue from 150 companies. And third, none of these companies can afford to be out of the most important market in the world, because that's what we are. We are the first economy in the world, before the United States of America, and we are also a market of 500 million people with high purchasing power. And so they will stay here. Let's not fear that, and let's not create an artificial fear on that. So I'm reasonably optimistic and very mobilized and determined.
Alfred de la Sens, Air Liquide. Shouldn't the CCCTB proposal be improved on the innovation side, not only for R&D, but also for on the profits or income from innovation, intellectual property?
Well, first, as you all know, there was a proposal in 2011 that couldn't reach an agreement, and we have revamped this proposal two ways. The first one is to have a two-step approach. First, common basis, then consolidation. But I have a warning here. It's not first we conclude on common base and then we'll see whether there will be or not a consolidation. The two steps mean there will be 1 year as a target for common basis and another year for consolidation, but this should be defined simultaneously. And the other improvement that we created incentives, tax incentives for innovation, for investment, and especially in R&D. And so these improvements already exist. A proposal from the Commission is never take it or leave it. So we are open to any kind of improvement that could help building consensus. I'm always open to good compromises. And this is good help, but since you represent Air Liquide, a company I know well, and I've often had discussions with your chairman, I think it's important, and this is a message I deliver here, that the business is vocal on supporting CCCTB, because it's the interest of the business. I'm truly convinced that it is a very important pro-business proposal that needs support. And we are ready to improve whatever can bring support from the business, not because we want to buy it, but simply because that's something that member states can hear. We have common interest there. It's not one against the other. It's really a general interest matter.
Yeah.
One more question.
Commissioner Moscovici, thank you. Kaisu Karvala from FIPRA, and I come from Finland. And I have to say that I'm a little bit worried about this proposal, the two new proposals. Have you made in your impact assessment also a very solid assessment on what will happen to the taxes within the European Union? We have put a lot of money in R&D. We have amazing gaming companies who pay a lot of taxes for a very small population. We're like 5.5 million, with a gaming company who have 100 million daily active users. So it would clearly plead the fact that at the end, a third of our taxes would go to Germany or to France, not to Finland. A little bit the same, we like drinking French wine, so should we actually, as we consume it in Finland, should the taxes go to Finnish authorities, like if good Finnish mobile games are played in France or Germany? I mean, stupid joke aside, but really, have you made assessment what it would mean for Nordic innovative R&D industries that are very vocal and good and fantastic mobile entertainment companies? Thank you.
Your comparison with wine is interesting, but I'm not that sure that it is totally relevant. When I'm sitting in the G20 meeting, and again, there was one in Washington, we speak about digital economy taxation. We don't speak about taxing wine, although it's become more and more international. And we had a very good Argentinian wine offered by the G20 presidency, but still, well, I'm not that sure that the revenue losses and that the challenges raised there are as important for wine than for digital economy. But yes, there was an impact assessment for CCCTB at least. One is, of course, going to be produced for the digital taxation. And this is a matter that can be discussed, obviously. I know that for CCTB, it's one of the key for a possible agreement, and I'm really welcome discussions on that. I had the occasion to express that not in Finland, but for example, in the Irish Parliament last year. But, you know, if I look at digital taxation, that's one of the points I will discuss with the ministers. Again, nobody has to fear delocalization. We are talking about user value creation, and well, the user is the same in Finland than it is in France, in Germany, and elsewhere. And finally, I think that we need to reflect about Europe and what Europe means. Europe is not only about member states. Europe is building a future together. And the question is, in the 21st century, if we want to create also digital European giants, it cannot be only Finnish, Irish, or American established in Ireland, etc. We must act together. We must put our sovereignty and share that together. We cannot reflect that way. And I think that no country, I'm certainly not accusing any country, and especially not Finland, can build its model on tax dumping or tax competition between member states. Is certainly not the future if we want a EU which is a global player in the 21st century in the digital economy. That's why I'm open to any discussion. We'll produce all impact assessment. And of course, as I said, it's not a take it or leave it. We've got to address those concerns. But I think that those who have those concerns must also understand what is the general interest of the EU as such.